Welcome back to The Narrative. I'm on with Brian Grimes. Welcome back, Brian. We're discussing pension reform and whether or not the Dickon Mitchell administration has handled the situation as well as they could, and whether or not they have disappointed workers based on the promises that they made prior to winning the 2022 general elections. Welcome back. Now, had you been given the opportunity to meet with the government, to meet with the attorney general and the drafters of the bill and the prime minister, and to
Hmm.
discuss this,
Hmm.
how and that they had listened, how
Hmm.
different would the bill that we saw going through all stages of the various houses,
Hmm.
different would that have been? What would have been your recommendations and contributions towards this?
Yes, the bill may have been slightly different, or it may have been remarkably different. Engagement, conversations, discussions, consultations. It is a magic. It is a magic wand. A lot of things can happen, and bills, projects, everything is better when people discuss and when people engage. So one thing we would have definitely brought to the table, and we have brought it publicly, and we have brought it to the table, but it was patently ignored by the representative of government. By the way, we haven't gotten a chance to sit with a policy maker on this matter. It's just senior public officers. The aspect of a pay and grade review, and I don't even want to make it sound so professional. Just bump up the salaries of those who will be affected. Give it a little bump. And this is not just Brian Grimes speaking. There is precedent within the region. The said document prior to the bill that the government circulated to the Public Workers Union, right? There was an example of pension reform in the region and the Turks and Caicos. I happen to know actors within the region because the public service unions within the region, they are connected. And the president there stated to me categorically, look, the government was extremely conscientious in this process, and what they did, they ensured that the salaries were bumped up to the 3% at the very least. And this is not wage negotiations, so that the workers can absorb that initial shock of having that deduction come into play. Because it's not a simple thing. We are living in a time where inflation is very high. We are living in a time where businesses are hoping and crying out for workers to their spending power to increase. And one can argue legitimately that this deduction will sort of lessen the spending power of workers, which directly will affect businesses, large and small, within Grenada, Carriacou, and PD Martinique. Look further to this, things like the total debt service ratio that financial institutions have to look at in granting loans. There will be an effect there in terms of now you have less disposable income, residual income to ensure that you can secure loans and everything. So definitely what we would have placed on the table, and we had placed on the table, but it was not spoken to in depth, or there was no seriousness on the other end to really accept that position, is a pay and grade review. And this is what some workers are complaining about. Just before this program, I received a phone call from, or a communication from, a senior health sector worker, a doctor, and they were hopping that, look, we had the government didn't come to us in any significant way, and look, now we have to pay 6% because they are a little bit above the threshold. 6% of our salary towards this. What is this about? We have not been regularized. Why are they doing this? And one would say, well, they making about $5,000. They good, but Kalisha, we are all aware that people live according to their income. So sometimes they take a loan and they don't have much money to play with outside of that. So this thing has come as a shock to the system, as a shock to the pockets of workers in the initial stages. And what we were suggesting
But
would
it
cause
couldn't
a
it
buffer for these workers.
it couldn't have come as a shock when the government has been saying from the time they won the election that
Mhm.
pension reform was going
Mhm.
have to happen as a major part of going forward with with the issue, to even tackling the issue of regularization. I think the government came in and or may have known all along that they may not be able to afford the continuation of the 1958. Although one of the things we have to note, though, Brian, is that the 1958 arrangements they're not ending this year. They're going to go on for a while. You have
Mhm.
um, hundreds, if not thousands, of people in the service who qualify under this arrangement and who are not retiring for another 20 years, another 30 years, and
Mhm.
so on, who
Mhm.
will benefit from this. So it's not going away. We're going to have two different arrangements running um, simultaneously, concurrently, for a
Mhm.
while at least before, maybe like what, 40 years from now, we would see the end of 1958 unless things get litigated in court and the arrangements are changed. Um, so the, the government saying that not keeping the promises to you guys the way you expected it. You are getting ready to go into negotiations with them. They did not do the pay and grade. They did not bump up the salary of the workers. They're going to be pulling 3% out of it. You are going in there to look for upwards of what, 8%, as high as 8%. You're asking for this year. How much are you asking for? Um, um, how everything that has happened, is that going to have an impact on just what's going to happen around the table?
Yeah. So you did say that Grenadians would have been or should have been expecting some form of reform. I would tell you this: what was in the consciousness of public officers was regularization, not reform. I can see that based on how it was pushed, based on the intensity it was pushed with by the administration. So the reform, apart from a contributory scheme, a reform doesn't have to be contributory. The last administration, they attempted a reform where we fell short with the gratuity aspect, but it was non-contributory. So the reform could have taken place in various ways. To your point, to your greater point, uh, the let me tell you something. As a trade union leader, listening to the then uh, political leader, and still political leader, but now Prime Minister of Grenada, Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell. One of the things that resonated with me, some might laugh at me at my naivety, but one of the things that resonated with me was when he said in different forums, there shall be one public service. I felt that.
That word "shall" really got you.
Yeah, there shall be one public service. So some laugh and say Grimes is naive, but as a worker, I was optimistic based on what we have been fighting for years. And the reality now is that we go to the table and there will be two different strands of public officers based on what they have implemented. So you have workers who now are doing the same jobs, right? The very identical work. One will have to be paying 3% towards a pension. The other one will not have to. And then let's say an increase of, what did you say, 8%? Okay, I will go with that based on what you have, asked for to happen. Um, the one there will literally be an advantage of one over the other. How does that mesh? How does that reconcile with the one public service? How is that going
Because
to happen?
you're
So,
saying in the instance of an 8%, or you might get lucky, you get 12% for each year.
mhm.
Either way, one group of workers is going to be out 3% of that increase. They're going to lose 3% of that increase because they of the pension scheme, and another is not going to lose anything. Um,
Yeah, in
within
principle,
that context.
the equity in principle would go out the window. So that will be when that time arrives very soon. That will be an interesting component of the negotiations.
But are you not planning to challenge this in court, though? If you talk about this, is there room, I should ask, based on the legal
Right.
advice that you've sought, to challenge this inequality that you say has been created in court?
Yeah, and this is a fantastic question. It's a great question because this thing is being propelled by the government of Grenada, which has three arms: the executive, which basically is the cabinet; the legislature, which basically is parliament, where they did what they did in December. But that's two arms: the executive and the legislature. Now there is the judiciary. So I believe, and we are awaiting our lawyer's final position on this. Very, very soon, we'll know exactly what we're going to do. That, in my humble opinion, it should be tested in court. I think that will be the responsible thing to do, and wherever it lands, this parties can say, okay, all right, fine, this is in the best interest. Let us move forward. But if it goes on as it is now, there will be confusion in perpetuity. This needs to be handled by a third party to say, look, guys, this is where we land. And I have been impressed over the years with the judiciary of this country. They have done well to be as independent as possible. And to me, in some ways, the strongest arm of government in a lot of ways, even though they are equal in terms of what the experts deem to be how the arms are looked at. So the judiciary needs to be looked at. And our lawyers are of the belief that this thing, there are some constitutional hurdles that have not been crossed. And I want to put on record here, Kalistra, the sector of workers, and I love the workers equally. We have to look at all of them, but the sector of workers that have been most shortchanged in this country, in my view, is the health sector. I mean, terribly shortchanged. Huh? So, in the 2.5 years that this administration has been here, going on 3 in the next few months, we heard that 7 nurses were regularized. So, there are hundreds of them out there. These are pensionable posts. You would imagine that nurses and doctors and orderlies and people of that ilk, they are pensionable posts. And we have seen other parties, and we are happy for the other parties, like the teachers. They're getting hundreds of people regularized. But no, you have not regularized them, and now you're going to tell them, hey, guess what? You're going under the reform and you have to pay 3 and 6% based on your salary towards this pension. I think that is high class deceit. I think it is unfortunate. And I think by and large, health sector workers will not be pleased with this approach and the lack of regularization and the false promises that were made to them prior to the coming into being of this new NDC administration.
So, and I've said this a few times on this particular interview now and before, that the contributory pension just seems more fair for the rest of the country.
Right.
For the rest of us who are out there paying our taxes that help to pay both the salaries and the pension of public officers. Um, another thing I keep raising with you every time we speak is the fact that people are of the belief that some public officers do not give a fair measure for the remuneration that they get. So that people just feel like the thing is a bit unfair. And so the government has support on a contributory pension because people feel that they should pay to get something like the rest of us out here in the private sector. Um,
Hmm.
what do you say to the rest of the public who are not members of the public service and who feel like they're
Hmm.
contributing to something that they're not
Yeah.
getting a fair measure out of?
Yeah. Well, I started off your program by saying expressly that the principle of pension reform, the union is not against. What we are against is how it was done. There, based on how it was done, we have a lot of question marks, some of which was ventilated and continues to be ventilated um, on your program. I think at times the whole thing can be deemed as unfair to public officers because some people feel like they were lied to. You talk about the restoration of pension, we're going to pay pension no matter what. And then what we have learned as soon as the administration came into power, they start working on the bill. And it's not Brian Grimes saying it. The learned Attorney General, Honorable Claudette Joseph, basically stated that. So as they touch down, they say, look, we're going to reform it. Right? So that's when they reached in. That wasn't before. The aspect of the unfairness of it, I cannot speak to that. I don't think it is unfair. The fact is, public officers have done tremendous work. We are the ones that protect the nation, protect the shores. We're talking about police officers, we're talking about custom officers. We collect the taxes so the roads could be fixed. Well, that's one of the things it's supposed to do. And schools could be refurbished. We teach the nation's children for them to grow up to be engineers, prime ministers, doctors, whatever it is. We take care of the sick and we restore our the nation's loved ones to proper health and so forth. So it cannot be underestimated, the work public officers do in this country. And remember, Kalistra, the reason we had such a decent pension to begin with is that public officers' salaries, by and large, are on the smaller end compared to the private sector, right? So this notion that this is unfair to the taxpayers and so forth. Why is nobody complaining about the fact that the administration, the government, they give themselves a huge increase, thereby increasing their pension, and that is also non-contributory. Nobody's talking about but the little public officer. And guess what? Guess who is going to be affected by this? Is the lower paid workers. The same contract people who prior to year before were not getting any increases at all and their salaries were stagnated. They are on the far end of it. So while you have a point, I'm not going to take.
Brian, do you think if the government, if the administration changes, that there might be a move to nullify the salary increases, or at least adjust the salary increases for the members of cabinet and the members of parliament? Because I noticed the opposition's protest was not as loud as opposition protests tend to be
Well,
on this issue of salary increases for their kind.
yeah, well, we're dealing with human beings. I cannot speak to what the opposition will do. I can only speak as current president of the union and member of the trade union council to the position of our union in this matter, and we try to be as impartial as possible. Yes, politics is a part of the interaction. It's inevitable that we have to get tied up in politics because it is policy making. But the opposition is the opposition; they are sovereign, and I don't know what the intention will be. I guess as time rolls on, you will know the intent in terms of different bills and in terms of different projects, in terms of different approaches they have towards certain things. But Brian Grimes and the PW cannot speak to that.
It was clear going into the last election that the public workers, that bloc that people consider to be this very powerful bloc in the scheme of politics,
Yeah.
was supporting the National Democratic Congress for a win in this election. It happened. Now you're concerned. It seems as if the government duped you. Well, you meaning the body of your constituents. Um, is that gonna? What kind of impact is that likely to have, Brian?
All right. So I want to be totally frank with you. I don't want to beat around the bush on this matter because it's a very direct question. Um, the majority of the public service was rooting for the NDC administration. Not all, the majority, and it is centered around pension and the restoration of pension. That's not a secret. That's not a secret. And it was paid. I know it has quickly been reformed to the dislike of many, and some are okay with it. Nobody's jumping over the moon with it. But I will just want to place on record here one act by any administration, it would be irresponsible of anybody in the trade union movement to worship at the altar in perpetuity of any administration for one act. The prime minister of this country has stated openly in forums, and I agree with him, that the government is supposed to be held accountable. So if you are a trade union leader, you are supposed to do your due diligence and do your fiduciary responsibility in holding the government accountable in terms of the workers, the all important public officers in this country, and not let them off the hook. And I dare say this is what the Brian Grimes and the PW is doing in terms of our deliberations. It is not a witch hunt. It is not that we are against the government. We are not the enemies of the state. We are just the voice for the voiceless, and we are representing our workers to the best of our ability.
One of the arguments is that the workers are going to be getting the NIS plus this pension fund that is being established. That with
Mhm.
both of them in play, it should be sufficient. Um, but what would your response to that be? Well, the 1958 people are also getting NIS, but they are not contributing to the 1958, so they are still.
Yeah.
We're still looking at two public services here with the way
Yeah.
the pension is now configured.
Yeah. This thing, I'm not too worried because, as we stated before, there's a concern that there is a possibility with this new pension plan that workers can outlive the pension. No, with NIS, they have done some significant amendments based on actuaries' advice to their law and to their policies, whereby you have to wait until 65 to get really the pension as we know it, right? And that basically it was 60. So that's 5 years different, and that is tremendous when you reach a particular age in life. Some people, as soon as they retire, they drop down. That is a fact. So I think the NIS, based on what they have done, they have protected themselves um, to protect the organization for sustainability. Does it work out in the short to medium term in the best interest of workers in this country? That can be debated. I would say no. I don't believe fundamentally me. That is my position, not the PW's. My position is retirement age. If anything, it's supposed to be reduced rather than increase based on the fact that all these lifestyle diseases and things we have here, people are reportedly living longer, but not to me based on when I look at the death news. That's not what it is. It's not
You know,
always about the quantity of life, but it's about the quality
the
of life.
quality. I
Yeah.
I get I get calls from people who they're calling me to tell me about how they've reached 60 and they're retiring from the public service, but NIS is in order to get the NIS they have to give up part of the benefits that they're entitled to because
Mhm.
they don't become eligible until they're 5 years later when they're 65 or 4 years later because they whatever they're around 60, 61, leaving the service.
Yeah.
Is that an area of concern as well? I've had a number of calls from people telling me their story about that.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I'm referring to in terms of social security. And this is why we are trying to dot I's and cross T's and make sure all things are done in the interest. We are not just opposing for opposing sake regarding this reform. And for example, in the public service, there's a mismatch. So you have to know how to do things. The NIS went up to 65, the public service remains at 60, right? So people are leaving expecting now mandatorily the public service at 60 and they go in and then they're getting a reduced pension from the NIS, which they have contributed to for eons. Is that really a fair arrangement? And all these things have to be looked at. And this is why, Kalistri, I'm disappointed in terms of the way certain things are happening in this country with the absence of the social compact committee. Now, if you have the private sector, trade union, civil society, government, and all these other bodies coming together on a monthly basis as it was done in the past, I think policies, laws, bills, acts of parliament will be more refined and more in the general interest of Grenadians if people can really discuss these things at length as opposed to it being shoved down the throat of Grenadians to say, well, we know best, this is what's best for you. Take that. We are ruling by decree, a la 79 to 83. It's I don't think that is the best arrangement. And I'm not saying that to say that there is bad intention from the NDC administration. That's not what I'm saying. I think they will do better. I respectfully posit that they will do better to engage stakeholders more in terms of their decision making and their policy making.
As far as we can go, I hope that we were able to cover as much as possible on this very important topic. That will impact the entire nation, really. And you're
Hmm.
welcome to come back anytime, as I'm sure this is not going to end here. You're welcome to come back at any time as we continue this discussion. And viewers, I am working on crunching the numbers so that we can talk about whether or not the government's decision to change the arrangement puts the country in a better position, or whether it puts the country in a worse position, and what position exactly it puts the workers in as well. Because while we would like them to contribute, it would not be fair, I think, to have people disenfranchised by this arrangement, especially in their latter years. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining me on the narrative.
Yes.
And
Al-
you've got a last word for us?
Yeah, it's always a pleasure being on this great platform. I enjoy our discussions and conversations, Calestra. So I would just encourage you in 2025 to keep up the good work and keep this platform at the high level and the banner that is flying at right now. Just keep it going. So thanks very much for your platform. I very much appreciate it on behalf of the Grenada Public Workers Union.
And we
Blessed.
appreciate your presence on the show as always. Thank you so much. This is The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Callistra Farah. That was Brian Grimes. He's the president of the Grenada Public Workers Union. They are now trying to engage government on the pension reform that's been undertaken. It's basically a done deal unless it goes to court, which may happen based on comments made by the president on this interview a short while ago. And the government asking their employees to contribute to a pension fund that they will receive later on down the road. Mind you, the 1958 arrangement, which went to court and got reinstated after the Pension Disqualification Act was ratified in 1985, remains in force, so that you have two separate arrangements for workers under the government in terms of a pension scheme, and that may be challenged. The attorney who's looking over the matter for the Public Workers Union has said that there are aspects of the bill that are unconstitutional, and this may likely head to court again. This is The Narrative. More when we come back.